Ethan shot and killed 4 high school classmates back in 2021. And this is truly historic because James Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley are the very first parents ever to be charged in connection with a school shooting. Now, Jennifer Crumbley, she already had her trial back in February. She was convicted on all 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Her sentencing has yet to happen. But again, James Crumbley also facing those 4 involuntary manslaughter charges. Prosecutors saying that the parents neglected Ethan's mental health and also allowed him access to a gun and ammunition. I do want to bring in James White, an attorney who we spoke with when Jennifer Crumbley's trial was happening. James, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
My pleasure.
So what do you make of this particular trial? Because it's interesting. There are a lot of the same witnesses that took to the stand with Jennifer Crumbley. And I was just curious to see how you thought that this trial has differed, if at all, from that of Jennifer Crumbley's.
Well, I think the defense is doing a good job at trying to explore this idea that other people had some knowledge that this young man was dangerous and something wasn't done about it. The problem with that, Stephanie, is, as a general matter in law, one of the things we look at when we hold people accountable is to a third party is, do you have a duty? As a general matter, walking down the street, if you see an armed robbery, while most of us would call the police, there certainly is no legal duty to do so. And that carries on into all sorts of different venues. What the prosecutor's doing here, which I thought they did effectively in the first trial, however, that jury was out quite a long time, is showing that not only was there a duty, but that duty was breached. And for reasons that I think we're all aware of, 3 or 4 that you've already mentioned, the argument becomes, as a parent, are you responsible for the bad deeds of your children? Now, many of these school shootings that we've seen across the country over the course of the last 20 years have involved a young man coming into possession of a firearm of his own accord, walking into a store, buying a shotgun, buying an automatic weapon. There have been cases of children getting into their parents' weapons. But this is unique in the sense where the parents certainly had some indicia of knowledge that this young man was dangerous. And most importantly, the school brought it to their attention. And if I could just make one more point, there seems to be a lot of focus on Mr. Hopkins, who was the school counselor. And, the idea that I understand what they're trying to prove. They're trying to prove that other people should have known. And since they didn't know, how could the parents know? And I think that's really unfair. Mr. Hopkins did not have access to the sort of information the parents did. He certainly didn't know the young man had a backpack and his gun at the time that he met with the parents. And then finally, what I would say here in Michigan, this is our second mass shooting in the last few years, the other one being at Michigan State University. This is a first for us. But I can tell you, I live pretty much adjacent to this county. And anytime there's a threat in our school system, they shut the whole place down. And sometimes it's a little bit of an overreach, but, so there certainly is a level of negligence on the part of the school district, in my opinion, but it doesn't rise to the level of gross negligence. And that's the standard to hold somebody accountable for involuntary manslaughter.
It's interesting because I want to go back to Jennifer Crumbley. We did see her take the stand, which, depending on your view of it, it didn't, have her show up in perhaps the most compassionate of lights. Do you expect that James Crumbley will testify on his own behalf?
It's possible. I think it is unlikely. One of the things that goes into consideration when putting a defendant on the stand, number one, it's their choice. It's the only choice they have during the course of a trial. They certainly can give advice, but this is their sole choice. So some of it will depend on his choice. Oftentimes, we don't put people on the stand because they're just not presentable. And we have not heard enough from Mr. Crumbley to know, is he articulate? Can he answer questions directly, or is he going to appear evasive? But I do think that if those barriers are cleared, it's rare that I recommend a defendant go on the stand, but I think this is a case where the jury is going to want to hear from him, and hear that he, like Mr. Hopkins and other people, just didn't have an idea of what was to occur. I think that's going to fall on deaf ears, but if you're going to throw a Hail Mary, putting him on the stand does make some sense.
So it seems as though this could actually wrap up fairly quickly, depending on whether James Crumbley takes to the stand or not. When do you think that this will then go into the hands of the jury? Will it be sometime this week? Or are you anticipating that even more witnesses will be called?
I don't expect that they need to call more witnesses. They have, they've done a great job of laying foundation as to what occurred that day, to the extent jurors weren't aware by the way of victims and police evidence. And now we're hearing from officials that had direct communication with Mr. Crumbley. And some of the interactions, whether it's writing the letter in math class or the meeting between the parents, the statements the parents made about needing to get back to work, I think a full picture has been painted. I wouldn't be surprised if there was to be additional testimony to hear from the parents of one of the victims, either one of the victims that were harmed or one of the victims that were deceased. That would be the way to circle back and really bring it home for these jurors. And that wouldn't surprise me. It'd be very difficult for these parents, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a presentation about their son or daughter and what happened to them and what their future plans were.
As we continue to follow the trial, anything that has really stood out to you thus far?
Well, again, I think this is I think prosecutors all over the country are watching this trial, and I think they see this as a new tool in their belt. And if Mr. Crumbley is in fact convicted, I think we're going to see prosecutors take a more careful look at the duty of parents as it pertains to their children. Our legislature doesn't seem ready to take up the issue federally or statewide, and I think the prosecutor, at least in this case, decided that she was going to do something about this. So I think this trial and Mrs. Crumbley's trial is setting a unique precedent, hopefully not a dangerous one, but a unique one. And Stephanie, just real quick, juveniles who get in trouble, stealing a car, whatever it is, when they go through a juvenile system, and if there's restitution, the parents get the bill. And that's, parents that had nothing to do with it, they get the bill. So we already have a standard that parents are responsible for the monetary problems associated with their children's acts. So we're not jumping into brand new law, but we're talking about putting people in prison, and that is a different aspect of it.
James White, an attorney with White Law, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.